The official story claims King Charles II died like a proper king. History remembers a sudden stroke. They record a few days of prayers and medical fuss. It was billed as a peaceful royal deathbed. Priests and courtiers surrounded him. The court records tell a different story. Court physicians described violent, uncontrolled seizures. They documented repeated loss of speech. They watched him suffer through choking fits and terrible convulsions. When they opened his body, the truth was worse. Autopsy records revealed a shrunken heart. His intestines were rotting. There was documented water around the brain. Physicians also recorded a single blackened testicle. His organs belonged to a man crushed by years of hidden illness. The public saw a charming monarch for most of his reign. He liked pleasure. He valued mistresses. He demanded spectacle. Behind the closed doors of his bedchamber, they were watching a man slowly collapse. The systems failed one by one. Gout crippled him. Leg ulcers refused to heal. He suffered crippling fatigue. He was plagued by neurological episodes that nobody dared to name. The official treatments were pure brutality. His doctors cut him open while he was still alive. They bled him repeatedly. They applied painful blisters to his skin. They forced him to vomit violently. They purged his body with catastrophic laxatives. Physicians called it treatment. Their clinical records read like medieval torture notes. The most damning part is simple. Everyone pretended he was fine. They maintained the facade until his brain finally snapped. The legend of Charles II is usually about charm and survival. He was the king restored after a bloody civil war. He brought back theatre, fashion, and royal pleasure. Paintings show thick, dark hair. They show fine fabrics and a languid, amused expression. He appears untouchable. That version is a cover-up. It hides the slow-motion medical nightmare. Medical documents show the symptoms stacking up from early adulthood. Gout constantly locked his joints. By his 40s, the leg ulcers were openly documented. He tried to hide the constant pain with humor and distraction. He could not hide the exhaustion. Court physicians privately noted his cognitive decline. They attributed it to the heavy burdens of state. They never admitted he was simply dying over decades. The physician notes from 1684 detail an especially severe period. The king's mind seemed suddenly absent. He often trailed off mid-sentence. Medical files from 1685 reveal the panic inside the court when the final seizures hit. The physicians, desperate and incompetent, only increased the brutality. They tried to save the charming king. They only succeeded in tormenting the suffering man. He was conscious through much of it. While the king decayed, the women surrounding him created their own lethal system. This system was built on beauty, proximity, and absolute cruelty to one another. The mistresses of Charles II were not passive beauties. They were instruments of finance and politics. They were professional predators. The story starts with Barbara Villiers, the Duchess of Cleveland. Contemporary reports from 1665 call her the most dangerous woman at court. She was a terror. She used sex for raw, transactional power. She demanded titles, cash, and estates. She demanded peerages for her illegitimate children. She used her body to dismantle the state coffers. She succeeded. Private letters discovered in 1991 reveal her chilling, calculated strategy. She would refuse the king until he granted the necessary funds. The women who served her witnessed the transaction firsthand. Her ladies-in-waiting knew the exact price of every night. They were paid to be silent. They were also paid to gossip. Witness testimony states that the female servants who dressed her mocked her for gaining weight after each pregnancy. They watched her negotiate power while judging her body. Then came Louise de Keroualle, the Duchess of Portsmouth. She was French. She was elegant. She was almost certainly a spy. Louise had a calculated softness. She contrasted sharply with Barbara's brute force. Her primary weapon was proximity. Her apartments in Whitehall Palace were documented to be the most luxurious. They were also the closest to the king's private chamber. Court records show Louise manipulated the king's finances and foreign policy. She was a national security risk. The women around her, including her own French attendants, understood the stakes. English female courtiers despised her as a foreign influence. They mocked her clothes, her accent, and her expense. This was female competition elevated to diplomatic warfare. Nell Gwyn, the orange seller turned actress, presents the biggest historical lie. The official version is that she was a simple, charming commoner. The reality was much more calculated. Nell was ruthless. She understood the power of public opinion. She used her common birth as a weapon against the refined mistresses. She was the one woman the public loved. This created a brutal triangle of feminine power. Barbara used lust and threats. Louise used subtlety and French gold. Nell used popularity and simple wit. They fought over access, money, and titles for their children. This was not polite rivalry. This was financial and physical warfare. Diaries of minor courtiers detail the constant daily humiliations. Louise would snub Barbara at dinner. Barbara would ensure Nell's stage performance was disrupted. The ladies-in-waiting for each faction acted as spies. They stole letters. They spread vicious rumors about clothing, debt, and sexual appetite. Female loyalty did not exist in this hierarchy. It was a fluid exchange of temporary alliances. The most successful women often committed the worst betrayals against each other. The fate of the royal illegitimate children proves this pattern. The official story credits Charles II with the elevation of his sons. Court records show the most successful illegitimate children were protected and promoted not by the king, but by the rivalries of their mothers. James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, was the king's favourite. His rise to prominence happened because rival mistresses wanted him elevated. They used him to weaken the power of other women. This was a clear example of female proxy warfare. The women who dressed the mothers were the first to pledge allegiance to the son. They sought future power. His fall happened when those same women switched their allegiance. They abandoned his mother. They sided with Queen Catherine's supporters, or a rival mistress. Female competition shaped the fates of royal children far more than the king's affection. The suffering was often amplified by other women. The Queen, Catherine of Braganza, was the most injured party. She was ignored. She was humiliated. She was forced to recognize the mistresses. She was forced to grant titles to their children. Yet, her greatest indignity was often delivered by female courtiers. Witness testimony states that female attendants often used the Queen's infertility against her. They whispered about her failure to provide a legitimate heir. They praised the health of the mistress's children to her face. They positioned themselves as potential supporters for a future Protestant bastard king. The Queen's own ladies-in-waiting often showed more deference to a mistress than to the actual Queen. The final devastating pattern emerges in the irony of survival. Barbara Villiers, the most notorious. She was the terror of the court. She accumulated vast sums. She outlived the king by 20 years. She became a difficult, wealthy old woman. Louise de Keroualle, the foreign spy. She was despised and almost broke after his death. She spent decades fighting to secure her fortune. She finally succeeded. She died in France, a very rich duchess. Nell Gwyn, the beloved, simple commoner. She was the one mistress the public liked. She died relatively young, only 7 years after the king. She died covered in agonizing tumors. The ugly reality is that Charles II never truly recovered from the psychological toll of his youth. The constant threat of assassination, the poverty of his exile, and the pressure of his restoration created a man who used pleasure as a shield. The public saw his charm. His doctors saw a broken man trying to mask terminal fatigue. The women saw a temporary power source. The most brutal cover-up was not the king's illness, it was the mythology of love. History claims Charles loved them all. Private letters discovered in the 1970s show he saw them as useful tools. He liked their company. He rarely loved them. They were an investment. They were a necessary cost of doing business. He paid them in titles. They paid him in attention and political access. The women lived in a world built on beauty, charm, and proximity to a king. But beauty always faded. Charm always soured. The king always died. Then the real danger began. The moment Charles II took his last, choking breath, female rivalry replaced royal favour. Women once praised for their elegance became immediate targets. Servants who dressed them in fine silks whispered about their decaying bodies. Courtiers who had bowed low now mocked their sudden decay. Alliances collapsed immediately. Diaries from 1686 document a rapid-fire decline. One minor mistress, once wealthy, was abandoned by her own attendants. They spread rumours that her money was gone. They refused to work without immediate cash payment. The women who addressed her daily were the first to describe her perceived body defects to potential creditors. They used their intimate knowledge of her body as a weapon. Some mistresses died wealthy in their beds. Some died begging for money in foreign lands. Some disappeared into France with trunks of state jewellery. Others died with nothing but massive unpaid bills. The merry monarch left behind a court full of ghosts. These were women who had fought each other, betrayed each other, and destroyed each other. They did it all to survive a world where beauty was the only currency. Loyalty lasted only as long as the king was breathing. This is the dark pattern of royal history. Men rule publicly, women fight privately, and the women closest to power, the most envied, the most beautiful, the most ruthless, often suffer the most brutal and final cruelties at the hands of one another. The next story begins exactly where this one ends. Another court, another king, another group of women promised everything and left with nothing but each other's inescapable cruelty.